Hello, Playgrounds. This is EA, and I am currently on my Asylum tour bus, and I'm snuggled away in the back lounge. I'm talking a bit quietly, I'm speaking a bit quietly, because Asylum headmistress is sleeping, and I also don't want to alert the girls to the fact that I'm even awake and back here, because if they think that I am, then they'll come back and they'll interrupt our whole situation. And this is our time. So I've been looking over some really beautiful questions that so many of you in this Asylum army have had and have sent in, and I'm really excited about the opportunity to get to answer in video form a lot of these for you. And there's so many questions, this will be definitely ongoing, but let's see, well, we've just finished a show, and it was wonderful, and before taking all of this off, I just wanted to talk to you about one question. Now, I'm looking at a question from Plague Rat AA131, which is Damiana Thorne. I hope I'm saying that correctly. And Damiana has a few questions, but one that I thought might be fun to talk about right now is question number 2, which is, have you always had a particular fondness of rats? Did that develop around the same time as the birth of the Asylum, or was there another time in your life when you first began feeling an affinity for them? And I love this question because it's a bit complicated, but it's definitely, when I was very small, I did have 2 pet rats, and I think that they were just something that someone might have given me. And I remember thinking that they were very interesting, but I think I was off studying, so I didn't really spend a lot of time with them, so they didn't really have an impact on my life. But when I really began to feel this incredible, almost like a brotherhood or a sisterhood with rats, with these animals that so many people definitely do not feel that affinity for, it was when I began to realize that I was a lab rat too. And that began with my first being put on prescription drugs for bipolar disorder, and I remember realizing at the time, primarily because I've obviously, as so many of you are, always been a staunch supporter of animal rights, the fair treatment of all animals, and that's not a vegetarian thing, that's just a humanity thing. And with my then, years ago, being put on these drugs, I just thought about it and I realized part of what I hated about being on any sort of a chemical substance, because as you know, I've never done drugs, I've never smoked a cigarette in my life, it's just, that's not what I do with this body that I've been given, this gift, to use during my time on this plane of existence. So I realized that one of the worst things about being put out of, honestly, necessity on this chemical substance that I have to take every day is the knowledge that most definitely those medications, those chemicals, those drugs were, frankly, without a doubt, tested on rats before they got their way to me. And I also, so that sorry, so that started a definite sympathy, and I pitied that I do so many things in my life to try to not support anything that would harm another creature of any kind. But it hurt to know that this was necessary, because I've tried, and it's definitely been proven to me and those around me that if I am not on these things, my safety is less guaranteed. And so I've got to be on these things, part of which is awful, particularly because I know that some creatures suffered so that I could have these. And then I realized that they're not the only ones being experimented on. And if you've read my book, you might be familiar with some kind of unpleasant situations that I experienced because I was on a drug that canceled out some other drugs that are very important for many ladies. And that wasn't known at the time. And I suffered the consequences of that, and so did probably hundreds of thousands of other young bipolar women. And then I realized that not only did I have pity for these animals that I'd always thought were beautiful, very cute, and very affectionate, and all of that, naturally, but I went from having that pity and that compassion to identifying. When I first realized that I was being experimented on, then I identified. And then I began to identify in further ways with rats. And that was also, I'd always known, because I know about history, because it's a passion, so I'd always known through the study of, well, any study of history in the past 500 years is going to tell you a lot about the plague. In the Middle Ages, when it wiped out, 2/3 of the European population, to the minor but very much feared resurgence of it in the Victorian age in the 1800s. And I knew that rats throughout all of that time, hundreds of years, had been unfairly maligned because it was thought that the rats themselves carried the plague. Of course, we now know, or a few of us do, that they didn't carry the plague at all. The plague was spread by fleas that essentially stowed away on the backs of these rats. And when the rats actually came originally from Asia, they got on these ships that sailed to Europe, and it was the fleas the whole time that were the ones carrying the disease and spreading it. There was always this thought that rats carry the plague and that they would bite you and then you'd be infected and you'd die. And rats actually were in no way responsible for your actual getting of that. It was the fleas that stowed away on the backs of the rats. So, not really their fault for being the carrier, but the point of all of this is that they were feared, and people have been repulsed by them and developed an absolute terror and hatred for these small creatures. And it's absolutely unjustified, because where that comes from, which is this fear of filth and disease, was never from them at all. So I'm looking at these animals, and I'm thinking, they're the source of this absolutely irrational fear, and therefore brutality, that is seen as completely justified. Aha! There again. I think mental illness very often, most often, almost always often, completely misunderstood and therefore feared to a degree that causes compassion to die, and fear to an irrational degree, and that prevents compassion, that prevents kindness, that prevents, obviously, understanding, and therefore a person that is perceived as mentally ill becomes something kind of repulsive and disgusting, because there's almost this fear like, hey, is that contagious? And that's simply through ignorance, but it's also through ignorance that these creatures are sold for $11 at Petco, because they're seen as nothing more than snake food, and that's the only reason that they're for sale, is snake food or trash. And I felt a definite connection with these creatures, and then I began to just develop clearly, like, almost an obsession with just learning about them, because I sensed that there was a lot more in common between me and these animals, but between all of us and these animals, than we ever really think about. And so I discovered that part of the reason why animals, well, part of the reason why rats in particular are so widely experimented on to such an extreme over many other animals. Two reasons. One, which is brilliant, and the other, which is really disgusting. The brilliant one is that rats, in fact, have 98-point-something% of their DNA in common with us. So, not only mentally in my perception of myself and these creatures, but genetically, we're almost the same. And so, that's why, most of what's given to us is tested on them first, because the similarities are close enough that, if it fucks with them, it's probably going to fuck with us. And if it doesn't fuck with them, it probably won't. And then the other thing was just that the turnover time of rats to produce litters is so short that it's just a constant supply of bodies and life waiting to be taken. And that is definitely part of the story and the analogy and the metaphor in the Asylum book, is that all of these girls are brought in as this ready, constant supply of bodies to be used and experimented on as the lab rats of that time. And all of this is real. And then I found these other things, like a bipolar girl or boy. A rat's most active time is in the middle of the night, because we often can't sleep. We're often nocturnal, can't sleep at that time. And just realizing how intelligent they are, and how so able to and freely give affection and love. My rats clean my nails out. They come and sit on my shoulder, and they take my finger, or in my lap, and they take my finger in their little paws, and they put their teeth under the nail, and they just go like that. And like they clean under the nails like they do their own. And then they also take a hold of my hand and start licking, and they're bathing me, which is a sign of acceptance. They're grooming me. And it's only funny because like my hands generally are clean, there's nothing much to groom, so they just keep licking until it's a bit painful, and then I have to just give them a hug and give them some tea and set them aside and bandage my hand. But I feel that of all creatures, that one is such a worthy friend, and also the most unappreciated and just used for brutality and nothingness. So I hope that answers your question. And at the bottom of it all, it doesn't take that much to realize that they're beautiful, naturally affectionate, naturally personable to humans, and they're so intelligent, so smart. And I've considered my partnership with them an absolute miracle in my life. I believe that they are angels on this plane that come into our lives, and rats sadly live for a very short time. Average, Sir Edward and Basil live forever. They're asylum rats, but average lifespan of a rat is less than 3 years. And that doesn't really seem fair when you consider that a turtle can live for hundreds. Nothing against turtles, but you see what I mean. So I'm also very proud that so many of you have been inspired just by maybe my lack of fear of them, or my kind of glamorizing them in some way, to actually realize that they're worth it, and rescuing some yourselves and going on to share with those around you what beautiful friends these are and how equal and worthy they are to us and to be part of our lives. So I think they're an absolute gift. And I also think it is my gift to get to speak with you about them and something that means so much to me. And I don't think that could ever be doubted, as I've made them the absolute mascot of the asylum, and everything that we stand for is essentially, we are the thing that is feared, but we shouldn't be. And yeah. That's it. I think it's time for me to wash off this and go lay down in my little bunky bunk and wait for the girls to dive in and not let me sleep. Thank you for this time, and I love you all so very much, and I can't wait to answer more of your questions in